When you install a state-of-the-art home security system, you expect it to do basically one thing with absolute precision, right? Keep the intruders out.
Right. I mean, you want it to be ruthless with burglars, but perfectly fine with you or your family or, the mail carrier.
Exactly. That discrimination is the whole point. But imagine if one day that system just sort of flips. Suddenly the motion sensors are triggered by dust, the alarms are blaring because the cat walked by.
Or worse, the security lasers just start actively tearing down the walls of your own house.
Yeah, the defense system itself actually becomes the primary threat to the structure. And welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
It's a terrifying scenario to picture with a house.
Yeah.
But it is the exact mechanism driving some of the most common medical conditions we face today.
It really is. So we spent the week combing through this massive stack of clinical immunology textbooks, historical medical journals from like the early 1900s, and recent public health studies on childhood allergies. And for all of you listening, our mission today is to completely reframe how you think about allergies and autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, we are exploring the overarching concept of hypersensitivity.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the ultimate irony we found in the research is that hypersensitivity is not a weakness. I think we always assume we're fragile if we have an allergy, but it's actually immune excess.
That's a great way to put it. The exact same biological weapons meant to clear out viruses and bacteria.
Like your antibodies, your T cells.
Exactly. They get aimed at the wrong target, or they fire with just way too much intensity. And that collateral damage basically becomes the disease itself.
It's wild. But to help organize this chaos for you all, we're going to rely on a foundational framework called the Gell and Coombs classification system.
Right, because biology is inherently messy. But back in 1963, these two British immunologists, Philip Gell and Robin Coombs, looked at a landscape of completely different symptoms.
You mean like rashes, swelling, organ failure, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, all of it. And they organized all of it into 4 underlying mechanisms, types I through Phi. It was just this massive triumph of organizing biology by how things actually work on a cellular level rather than just, what they look like on the surface.
Right, getting to the actual root of it. But before we break down those 4 types, we really need to look at how doctors first realized the immune system could even turn against the body.
Oh, the history here is fascinating. For the longest time, medicine assumed the immune system only did good things. Period.
Yeah, but there's this story from 1902 that completely shattered that assumption. And it involves French physiologists Charles Richet and Paul Portier.
Right, they were studying sea anemone toxin.
On a yacht. In the Mediterranean. Which is just, such a flex for early 1900s science. They were injecting dogs with small amounts of this toxin, basically trying to generate protective immunity.
They were essentially trying to make a vaccine, which, to be fair, was the standard logical leap at the time. The scientific consensus was, if you expose the body to a little bit of a toxin, the body builds defenses.
Right, and the subject is permanently protected.
Exactly. But instead, when they re-injected these previously exposed dogs weeks later with a tiny, totally harmless-sized dose of the toxin, the dogs just collapsed.
And died within minutes.
Yeah.
It was the exact opposite of protection. I literally had to reread the notes on this part because it is incredible that Charles Richet actually won the 1913 Nobel Prize in medicine for discovering something going catastrophically wrong.
Yeah, he didn't find a cure. He found a brand new way for the body to destroy itself.
Which is pretty dark, to be honest.
It is. But that failure required a brand new vocabulary. Richet actually coined the term anaphylaxis.
Wait, break that down for us.
Sure. So if phylaxis in Greek means protection, anaphylaxis translates to without protection or anti-protection. It was really the first definitive proof that an immune response could be fatal.
Wow. And right around that same time, I think it was 1906, an Austrian pediatrician named Clemens von Purkay was noticing something similar in his own clinic.
He was. And he coined a word that literally everyone uses today, allergy.
Okay, I want to pause on that for a second because the original definition of that word was completely different from how we use it today, right? Originally, allergy was just a neutral term.
It was entirely neutral. Von Purkay combined the Greek words allos, meaning other or different, and ergon, meaning work or reaction.
Altered reactivity.
Exactly. In the early 20th century, clinicians used the word allergy to describe any exaggerated reaction, and that actually included protective immunity.
Wait, so if your body reacted differently the second time it saw a substance, even if it was successfully fighting off a disease, that was an allergy?
Yes. It was only decades later that our modern usage kind of narrowed the word down to mean strictly the harmful, miserable reactions we think of today.
So the very word we use to describe a peanut allergy or like hay fever started out just meaning your body remembers this. That is just fascinating.
It really reframes it, doesn't it?
Totally.
Okay.
So let's look at how the body actually executes these self-destructive attacks today. This brings us back to the first two categories in that Gell and Coombs map types on it too.
Right. These are the fast antibody-driven mechanisms. Let's start with type I, which is the immediate IgE-mediated hypersensitivity.
This is the classic allergy most people picture today, right?
Exactly. And here is how the mechanism works at a cellular level. On your very first exposure to an allergen, say ragweed pollen, your body inappropriately decides this harmless pollen is a threat.
Even though it's just a plant.
Right. And so it produces a specific class of antibodies called IgE. These IgE molecules travel through your tissues, and they embed themselves onto the surface of specialized immune cells called mast cells and basophils.
Okay, so I picture these IgE antibodies like microscopic tripwires. They have a stem that embeds into the mast cell, but their arms, the parts that are uniquely shaped to catch the ragweed pollen, point outward.
That's a perfect analogy.
They just sit there in your tissue, loaded and ready.
Right. And the physical mechanics of what happens next are crucial. On re-exposure, when you breathe in that ragweed pollen again, the pollen doesn't just bump into one tripwire.
What does it do?
A single pollen grain binds to two adjacent IgE antibodies at the exact same time, physically pulling them together.
Oh, like cross-linking them.
Exactly. That physical tug, that cross-linking on the surface of the mast cell, is the trigger. It causes the mast cell to instantly degranulate.
Which means it dumps its internal payloads, right? Like chemicals like histamine straight into your tissues.
Yes. And that histamine causes nearby blood vessels to dilate, smooth muscle to contract, and fluid to leak out.
Which gives you the immediate sneezing, the itchy eyes, the congestion.
Right. And if this happens systemically, like all over the body at once, your blood pressure plummets and your airways constrict.
That's anaphylactic shock, like with the severe penicillin allergy. It happens in minutes because the weapons were already locked and loaded.
Precisely.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting to me. If type I is immediate, why do people always say you don't react the very first time you eat a peanut?
That comes down to a process called priming or sensitization. You cannot have a hypersensitivity reaction to something your immune system hasn't formally met and prepared for.
So that very first exposure is always silent.
Always. You might eat shrimp for years without issue, but at some point, your immune system makes a mistake and starts quietly building up those IgE tripwires in the background.
So it's only when you cross a certain threshold of sensitization that the next shrimp you eat triggers that massive degranulation.
Exactly.
But with peanuts, the research suggests a lot of kids are getting primed before they ever even taste one, right? There's this dual allergen exposure hypothesis.
Yes, this is a huge revelation in the field. An infant might be exposed to tiny, invisible traces of peanut protein through their skin.
So like maybe a parent ate a peanut butter sandwich, didn't wash their hands perfectly, and just touched the baby's cheek.
Right. And because an infant's skin barrier can be slightly compromised, especially if they have eczema, that exposure silently arms the mast cells.
Then months later, the first time the kid actually eats a peanut, boom, type I reaction.
Exactly. The road of exposure matters immensely, which is a concept we'll actually return to later. But for now, if type I is about arming mast cells to release histamine, type 2 is a much more direct assassination attempt.
Uh-oh. Okay, what's type 2?
We call type 2 cytotoxic hypersensitivity. This involves different classes of antibodies, IgG or IgM. In type 2, these antibodies bind directly to antigens sitting right on the surface of your own cells.
So they basically paint a target on your own tissue. This is the ultimate friendly fire.
It really is. Once those antibodies bind to your cell, they recruit other destructive immune cells, or they activate something called the complement system.
And the complement system is like a cascade of molecular dominoes in your blood.
Great way to put it. Once an antibody tips over the first domino, it triggers a chain reaction that ultimately punches physical holes in the target cell, causing it to just explode.
Wow. The examples in the research for this are pretty intense. Like, this is what happens in an ABO blood transfusion mismatch, right?
Yes. If you have type A blood and I give you type B, your pre-existing antibodies will bind directly to the surface of those foreign red blood cells.
And the complement system will just destroy them right inside your bloodstream.
Exactly. Or in good pasture syndrome, where the antibodies attack the collagen in your own kidneys and lungs.
But the one that really stood out to me as, frankly, pretty unsettling was hemolytic disease of the newborn. or Rh disease.
Yeah, Rh disease is a profound example of a type 2 mechanism.
Hmm.
If an Rh-negative mother is carrying an Rh-positive fetus, and some of the baby's blood leaks into the mother's circulation.
Which routinely happens during childbirth, right?
Right. Well, the mother's immune system sees that Rh factor on the baby's blood cells as a foreign invader, so she produces IgG antibodies against it.
So during her first pregnancy, the baby is born fine because the mixing mostly happens at delivery. But the mother is now primed.
Exactly. If she has a subsequent pregnancy with another Rh-positive baby, those maternal IgG antibodies are small enough to actually cross the placenta.
Oh.
Yeah, they will bind directly to the developing fetus's red blood cells and destroy them. The mother's immune system is effectively treating her own fetus like a pathogen.
It sounds absolutely terrifying. But this understanding actually led to one of the greatest, quietest triumphs in modern medicine, didn't it?
It really did, because doctors know exactly how this type 2 mechanism works now. They routinely give Rh-negative mothers a shot called RhoGAM.
And that essentially intercepts and hides those fetal blood cells before the mother's immune system can ever see them and get primed.
Exactly. It turned a leading cause of fetal death into something entirely preventable.
It highlights why understanding the precise how matters so much. If you know the mechanism, you can engineer an intervention.
Absolutely.
So if types I and II are the body's rapid response missiles, what happens when the immune system leaves its spent ammunition just like floating around in the bloodstream?
That's where the timeline slows down. And we enter the second half of the Gellen-Coombs map, the slow burners. Let's look at type 3.
Which is immune complex mediated, right?
Yes. So in type 2, the antibody binds directly to a cell structure. But in type 3, the antibody binds to soluble antigens.
Just free-floating proteins in your bloodstream.
Right. And when antibodies latch onto these floating proteins, they form clumps, which immunologists call immune complexes.
I think of this like a microscopic traffic jam. Your blood is just full of these floating clumps of immune debris.
Exactly. And if your body produces too much of this debris, these clumps are just small enough that the body's cleanup crews can't clear them out efficiently, but they are just big enough to get stuck in your body's fine filters.
Like, they lodge in the tiny, high-pressure blood vessels of your kidneys, your joints, your skin.
Yes. And once those clumps get stuck against the blood vessel wall, they cause massive local inflammation. They activate that complement system we talked about earlier.
And that attracts neutrophils, right? The aggressive first responder.
Right. The neutrophils show up, see the mess of immune complexes, and try to clear them by releasing destructive enzymes.
But because the clumps are stuck to the blood vessel, the neutrophils end up completely wrecking the blood vessel wall itself.
That's the collateral damage. Lupus nephritis is a classic example, where complexes of DNA and anti-DNA antibodies literally clog and damage the filtering units of the kidneys.
What's amazing here is that this type 3 mechanism is actually the exact thing Clemens von Perquet was studying when he invented the word allergy in 1906.
Right, he was looking at a condition called serum sickness. Back then, kids with diphtheria were being injected with an antitoxin derived from horse blood.
Right. And the timeline of their symptoms is the key to understanding type 3, isn't it? The kids didn't react immediately after the injection.
No, they developed fever, severe joint pain, and rashes roughly 7 to 14 days later.
Because it takes the body about a week or two to churn out enough antibodies against those foreign horse proteins to start forming those clumps in the blood.
Exactly. So the very condition that gave us the word allergy isn't even the instant type I reaction most people picture today.
It's a slow, week-long, a type 3 reaction. That is so cool.
It really is. Which perfectly sets up type 4, the slowest mechanism of them all. We call this delayed type hypersensitivity.
And the major biological twist here is that type 4 requires absolutely no antibodies at all, right?
Zero. It is entirely cellular. It is mediated by T cells.
Specifically, these are your Th1 helper cells and CD8 cytotoxic T cells, right?
Yes. And if we want to visualize this, the T cells act like scouts and heavy artillery. Instead of launching antibody missiles from afar, the T cells themselves have to physically migrate through your tissues to the site of the antigen.
And once they arrive, they release chemical flares called cytokines.
Right. And these flares recruit angry macrophages, the heavy artillery, to march in and cause inflammation.
Because this requires actual cellular movement, multiplication, and coordination across the whole body, it inherently takes 24 to 72 hours to develop.
Exactly.
This completely busts a major misconception for me. I think a lot of people assume that hypersensitivity reactions always happen fast.
Yeah, that's a Very common misunderstanding.
But if you go on a hike and brush up against poison ivy, you don't start blistering on the trail. The oily allergen from the plant, urushiol, binds to your skin proteins and alters them so they look foreign.
Right, and then your T cells have to recognize this, travel all the way to the lymph nodes, multiply, and march back to the skin.
So the intensely itchy, blistering rash doesn't appear for a day or two. That's a classic type IV reaction.
It is. Another crucial clinical example is the tuberculin skin test, the PPD test you might get for work or school.
Right, where they inject a tiny bit of inactivated TB protein under your skin.
Yeah. If your T cells have been primed by a past TB exposure, they will migrate to that spot and create a firm, red, raised bump.
And clinicians are explicitly told not to read the test immediately. You have to come back in 48 to 72 hours, precisely because the type 4 T cell mechanism is so slow.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have these 4 neat boxes. Type I is the instant mast cell tripwire. Type 2 is the direct antibody attack on cells. Type 3 is the floating clumps causing collateral damage. And type 4 is the slow, delayed T cell infantry.
Right, but as always, biology is rarely that clean.
Right, so what happens when an antibody latches onto a cell, but instead of marking it for destruction like type 2, it just stays there? Does it do anything?
That is exactly where the Gell and Coombs framework starts to fracture. Modern science has found exceptions, and the best example is Graves' disease.
Oh, interesting. What happens there?
In Graves' disease, you have an antibody that binds to a receptor on your thyroid gland. But instead of destroying the receptor, the antibody actually mimics a hormone and activates it.
So it acts like a key turning on the ignition.
Yes, driving the thyroid into severe overdrive and causing hyperthyroidism. Gell and Coombs never anticipated an antibody that would stimulate rather than destroy.
Wow.
Today, immunologists often unofficially refer to this as a type V reaction.
Type V, that makes sense. Before we move on to how all this impacts us today, there is a fundamental distinction we need to establish regarding food.
Oh, definitely.
When we talk about a type I peanut allergy, that is an immune system overreaction. But a food intolerance, like lactose intolerance, is an entirely different biological process, right?
Completely different. If you are lactose intolerant, you are simply missing the enzyme needed to break down milk sugar in your gut.
So there are no antibodies, no T cells, no immune involvement at all.
Zero. It causes severe gastrointestinal discomfort, sure, but through a completely non-immunologic pathway.
It's a plumbing issue, not a security system issue.
That is a vital distinction to make. True hypersensitivity is strictly an immune phenomenon.
So, looking at the public health side of this research, it feels like allergies are just everywhere now. We've got peanut-free tables in schools, EpiPens in every nurse's office. Are our immune systems actually getting worse, or are we just noticing it more?
The epidemiological data shows they are genuinely increasing. And to understand why, we have to look at the hygiene hypothesis, which was first proposed by an epidemiologist named David Strachan in 1989.
Right. And he observed this really curious trend. Children growing up in larger families who were exposed to more frequent minor infections from their older siblings actually had significantly lower rates of hay fever and eczema.
Yes. The theory is that our modern, highly sanitized environments with heavy antibiotic use, smaller families, and fewer early childhood infections are actually depriving the developing immune system of the training it desperately needs.
That makes so much sense because the immune system's default state requires active, ongoing education, right?
Absolutely. Without sufficient microbial exposure to keep the immune system busy fighting real threats, its internal balance skews.
It shifts heavily toward what we call a Th2 profile, right? Which is the specific cellular pathway that drives IgE production and type I allergies.
Exactly. The hygiene hypothesis fundamentally reframes hypersensitivity. It argues that this isn't just random bad luck, it's a direct biological byproduct of how rapidly we've changed our living environment over the last century.
And trying to outsmart this rising tide of allergies has led to some pretty spectacular failures in public health, hasn't it?
Oh, some massive ones.
Like, back in the early 2000s, pediatricians were terrified by the rising rates of peanut allergies. So the official guidelines told parents to strictly delay giving peanuts to infants until they were 2 or 3 years old.
And the logic seemed sound at the time. Keep the allergen away so the immune system doesn't get triggered.
But the interesting part about that logic is how completely it backfired.
It really did. That avoidance strategy made intuitive sense on the surface, but it ignored how immune tolerance is actually built in the gut.
Right. And in 2015, there was this landmark clinical trial called the LA8 study Learning Early About Peanut Allergy, and it changed everything.
Yes. This was the study that looked at Jewish children in the UK whose parents avoided giving them peanuts compared to Jewish children in Israel who were routinely given a peanut puff snack called bamba in their first year of life.
Yeah, the difference in allergy rates was just staggering.
It was. The LAP study definitively proved that early regular introduction of peanuts into an infant's diet actually dramatically reduced the risk of developing a peanut allergy by over 80%.
80%. Because introducing the protein early through the digestive system teaches the gut's immune system tolerance. It learns that this protein is food, not a threat.
Exactly. By recommending strict avoidance, we were preventing that gut education while still allowing infants to get silently sensitized through the skin dust we talked about earlier.
Recommending avoidance was actively fueling the epidemic. We completely reversed the pediatric guidelines worldwide because of that single study.
It just proves that hypersensitivity fundamentally represents a failure of immune tolerance, the mechanisms your body is supposed to use to recognize what is harmless and what is self.
So if there are a few core takeaways for you listening from all these sources, it comes down to this. First, hypersensitivity is not your immune system being weak. It is your immune system acting with excessive, misdirected force.
Right.
Second, your very first exposure to an allergen is silent. It primes the system. Only re-exposure triggers the reaction.
And third, the mechanisms of destruction span an incredible range, from the instant mast cell tripwires of a type I peanut allergy to the days-long T-cell migration of a type 4 poison ivy rash.
Yeah, and this knowledge goes far beyond textbook theory.
Oh, absolutely. The rising prevalence of asthma, the management of autoimmune diseases like lupus, the entire field of organ transplantation.
Where doctors have to meticulously suppress type 2 and type 4 rejection mechanisms so your body actually accepts a new heart or kidney.
Exactly. All of modern immunology rests on understanding these four pathways.
It brings us right back to that home security system.
Yeah.
We spent a century figuring out exactly how the sensors are misfiring, whether they are instantly sounding the alarm or slowly tearing down the drywall over a matter of days.
Right.
But exploring the hygiene hypothesis in the IgE study leaves you with something pretty profound to chew on. If our modern sanitized environments have accidentally reprogrammed our immune system to overreact over the last few decades, what happens to our internal defenses as we continue to drastically alter our environment and our microbiome?
It's a huge question.
Are we unwittingly setting the stage for entirely new types of hypersensitivity reactions in the future? We might just be rewriting the code of our own security system way faster than it can adapt.